It's 21 minutes past the hour, a bit late, but we'll keep it short and sweet. This is what's coming up.
The clamor for constitutional reforms has heightened
responses to the question of a referendum.
A lot of talk about the referendum this past week, but is it more of confusion or clarity from the coverage?
Media inataja mambo ya referendum, lakini kusema hivyo inaharibu.
Mimi kwangu ningeomba kwamba media waendelee kuelimisha Wakenya ili wajue ni nini kinachoendelea kuhusiana na referendum.
What are the thoughts from Kenyans on the role of the media in shaping this referendum debate?
I think it was more about the horror that this video showed. You have two women, two innocent children being led by these armed men, taken to a spot and tied blindfolded and shot.
We'll also be looking at a compelling piece by the BBC team on how they verified information from an online video in Cameroon. And with my guest that you're about to meet, we'll also be talking about the depiction of the main characters and subjects within the murder case. This is involving Monica Kimani, the late, and Jowie Irungu, as well as Jackie Maribe. We'll see a contrast in what has been portrayed this past week. I'll start with Bona David Makali. He is a senior in the profession. He has been an editor in various newsrooms, but is now head of content at Radio Africa, that houses many of the radio stations that you listen to, and as well as The Star. And next to him is Christine Mungai. She has been a colleague here at the East African, but is now a writer and a journalist, still a practicing journalist, and writes for many international publications. And next to her is also someone who tries to write for international publications. He does, on Al Jazeera and what have you. That is Patrick Gadara, and a participant on many of our shows. Thank you for coming on. And as well, a cartoonist. I'm sure you've seen some of his depictions and caricatures that he's put out there in his weekly following on the news and current affairs. Now, what you've just seen there in the backstory, it's a video that sparked international outrage when it came out in July. It shows Cameroonian soldiers executing two defenseless mothers and their toddlers, labeling them Boko Haram sympathizers. Now, when the video first came out, the Cameroonian government dismissed it as fake news, but BBC Africa investigations revealed it is to be authentic. And on tonight's backstory, BBC Africa security correspondent Tommy Oladipo takes us through the verification process that is now invaluable for journalists in the digital age.
Oui, la petite fille là, viens. Comme ça là. Oui. Reste comme ça là. Reste ça. Allez. Oh, reste comme ça. Attends-toi ici. Ouais. Assieds-toi.
Mon petit, ça nous fait mal, mais tes parents vous ont mis dans un... Il a pris la tête, les gars.
You have two women, two innocent children being led by these armed men, taken to a spot and tied blindfolded and shot. And the images there were so strong, so shocking, that everybody who watched it had that kind of response, wondering how could this happen? What were the circumstances? And just on face value, could be anywhere in the Sahel. But there are certain clues that the researchers started to use to find out exactly where it was. Now, at the time, The Cameroonian government said this was fake news, that this could not be Cameroon, even though some people had hinted that it was. They said, you know, the uniforms that the soldiers were wearing, not what soldiers would wear in that part of Cameroon. They said the weapons they had were not what they were using. And then that's when BBC Africa Eye's investigation kicked in to find out whether the government was indeed telling the truth. There was a tip-off that the team got from a Cameroonian source saying they should look at a town called Zelevet, which is in the north of the country, and that then helped them narrow down the areas they were searching, and they were able to use, for example, the outline of the mountains, the ridge line, and match it to what was on Google Earth. And that sort of helped, and having a town that they could sort of center on, that helped ease their investigation. And with that, they were eventually able to match that ridgeline to one that was actually on Google Earth. Chronolocation, for example, that's another interesting one, where they were able to look at, for example, the angle of the sun, measure it to the length of the shadows of the soldiers in the video, and sort of piece all of that together and tell what time of the year this was, when exactly this was, and so it's quite a lot of painstaking work that this team of more than 15 people, or close to 15 people, did to bring out the final investigation. This case in Cameroon is not unique, where a government says something is fake news and dismisses it. Very often, many African governments, or many governments elsewhere in the world do that. There's sometimes when we are trying to get into something and a government releases a statement, and people expect that just because the government has said something, we should keep quiet and just take it as it is. But I think that's part of the role of the media. We're also there to ask more than is given to us. So we can do further investigation. Okay, if somebody tells me X, Y, Z, I should be able to also confirm that. I shouldn't just take it as it's given to me as a journalist. I should be able to do more, and I think we will expect that many more governments will be telling us, using the phrase fake news, for example, to dismiss a lot of allegations. But I don't think the work of the journalist stops there. If anything, I think that's where the job of the journalist intensifies.
BBC Africa's security correspondent Tommy Oladipo, thank you for sharing your backstory on that compelling piece. Just to get initial reactions from our guests here and from what they see happening at home. I'll start. No, you'll be a bit too hard. No, let me start with you, Patrick. From what you've seen, I'm sure you even followed the full thread of that story.
Well, I did, and I thought it was quite impressive that BBC went through that. We know from our own experience here in Kenya that there are many cases where our government has come out and denied things that especially security forces have been accused of doing, etc. And I wish our media would do more of this, you know. So go in, dig into what you're being told, you know. Don't just take it at face value. And the other thing I found quite impressive was the way they released this. So it wasn't really a story on their site. They put it out on Twitter as a thread, which is kind of a new thing. And I thought that was quite impressive, that a big media station could actually sort of run a story on a platform such as Twitter. And perhaps it's something that also we could learn.
And we saw something happening actually last night. Profiteers was meant to run on KTN, and then they put it on Twitter, a platform that many people now are able to consume the news for themselves. Your reactions to this BBC piece?
Yeah, I heard someone say once that if, for us as journalists, basically, as meaning makers, as creators of meaning, if one person or if one source says that it's raining, and the other person says that it's sunny, it's not our job to quote both sides. It's our job to go outside. Yes. Go outside and check the weather, you know. So this piece by the BBC really embodied that spirit, you know, that it wasn't enough for the video to come out and for the government to say it's fake and for it to be left there. Okay. That they really went the extra mile to like actually verify and to prove or disprove, right? We're living in a moment where it's kind of like, people are calling it like a post-truth moment, where it doesn't really matter what you say. What matters is your persuasion, or like how easily you persuade other people. But a piece like this really clarifies for us that there really is room for investigation and verification, and it matters, you know. Yeah.
Okay, David Makali, you're laughing there at the analogy there of if someone tells you it's sunny or raining outside.
That was a perfect. That was a perfect, you know, analogy. What journalists should do.
Yes.
Anyway, with regard to that story, I think it's a horrifying account, and let me say, journalists are out here doing these things.
So you've seen it in your years as an editor, as a journalist yourself,
I mean,
here in Kenya.
and there's lots of examples of that done even locally. I mean, we've gone out, journalists have gone out. I remember, I don't want to name them, they've worked here, Moha, Namu, they've gone out and established a lot of things. You remember first of all, you know, there was the killing of a particular GSU officer, which was really followed by our journalists. And they did something similar to this, because they went up to the home, they sort of reenacted how did it happen, he had been assassinated and so forth. I mean, these things are done.
Yes.
It's just that we have to figure out whether, you know, the environment or sort of circumstances we're doing these things allow us to do them and leave the next day. Because
you laugh, Gadara, but that is an angle.
That is really the dimension that you see the slogan in journalism, or is it the guiding principle, is that do a story and leave to tell another story. I mean, that's become the standard.
Yes.
And I've got to say, and if you think one of the premier examples of where media should have done something similar, you know, or at least questioned what they were being told, was, for example, during Westgate, which we just celebrated the 5 years off. And I would challenge people, actually do this as an experiment. Just go to the tweets that the media itself was putting out in the 4 days of Westgate. And you will be very shocked how they're reporting at one point 15 people have been identified as terrorists. Then another point they say all 6 have been killed. You know,
granted, though, within those 4 days, there's a lot that was developing.
Exactly, but my thing was, they were simply regurgitating what the state was telling them. And the state was lying through its teeth. You know,
there is a place to go by official account.
That's the problem.
Yes.
You see, if you said, I mean, BBC could have gone by the official account, and the official account is, it is fake news.
And then find out your own version
now,
of the story.
Our thing is, today is 5 years later. What do we know about Westgate? You know, which of our media houses are going to tell us for 4 days what happened in that mall?
Yes.
You know, it's kind of, well,
and I believe
it's calm, it's gone now.
Even Namu, the one we've mentioned, he did a piece as well after.
He did a piece immediately after, and actually there have been several other investigations done, mostly by people outside of Kenya.
Yes.
You know, or by correspondents based here, foreign correspondents based here. Tristan McConnell is the one who's done, I think, the most recent one. I was even won awards for it. And it debunked lots of what Namu said. Namu told me himself that they were misled by the cops. The cops tended to exaggerate what they did, you know.
Okay.
But my thing is, if we're interested in truth, and this was a huge, big seminal moment, where are the media houses that have gone back and said, all right, 5 years later, what do we know? Okay. You know, and why don't we know, you know, what KDF was doing there for 4 days?
Especially, but at least we debunked the famous quote of mattresses burning. What's your reaction to this? From what he's spoken about the environment that we work in, just before we get into the vox pops.
So for me, one thing that really came out from the BBC video was they didn't go around getting quotes and inside information from various people. They used the video as the source of data, basically.
Okay.
And then they used Google Earth, Google Maps. They looked at the angle of the sun, the terrain, they mapped it against like the mountains, all this stuff, right? So for me, when we use data sources like that, it's really neutral in the sense that you can't be accused of going around and inventing your own terrain, right? Like a mountain is a mountain, right? So once we get, I feel like if we could get more people being more competent to do this kind of work, and also just having the time and the breathing room to do it, then it kind of circumvents what Makali is saying, that sometimes you're trying to really go into the bottom of something, but your life is in danger, right?
Yes.
So the data, right, in a way kind of protects you, right? When you use this indirect kind of neutral approach to it, rather than the way we usually do it, where it's like you have to go and speak to someone or record them secretly, that kind of stuff.
But it's played out this week, and he mentioned it, and I really want to clarify on this point, because The Profiteers, the piece that was done by Africa Uncensored, it didn't air, because obviously there's been some influence to it. There's an environment that we work in, Makali.
Yeah, true. And you know, what these guys are saying, and you know, sometimes when I listen to Gadara, and Gadara is a journalist, you know, when he condemns journalists, and he's an environment of journalists and is practicing as one. Yes. You know, I sometimes wonder whether he's being realistic. Because, listen, there are two factors which contribute to this kind of work that we are seeing there. One is the resources that you have as a journalist to actually pursue a story to that conclusion.
Yes.
And BBC lays out lots of resources for them to do global stories. Some media houses may not have the capacity to do that. And when they do, maybe to a certain extent, and that's what they can do. And you cannot invest the whole, you know, company's resources in pursuit of one story, because there are many stories that must be done, and of equal or even greater importance sometimes. And two, you know, is the environment I'm talking about. I mean, there are places you'll do some things and there are some things you won't do. He mentions Westgate. I mean, you know, journalists did quite a bit about Westgate. But sometimes you can be pursuing things and to no avail. Okay. You know? And Gadara must appreciate that there's a point at which, as a journalist, you pursue a story and then you leave it at certain points, because otherwise you leave one story in your life.
Or maybe he stops being a journalist when the question is, we need
answers. No, actually, no, I don't.
It's something that you pursue.
And just very quickly.
Real quick,
okay, first, I think we should beware when Makali says that it's about fearing for your life, or it's about spending all the resources of this is hyperbole, to be quite honest. There are stories that are dangerous to do, and I completely accept that.
Yes.
Yes.
But I really don't buy the idea that if media wanted to find out about what happened in Westgate, they'd be spending the resources of the entire company.
What makes you think otherwise?
The second thing is this. It's not just Westgate. In the elections, remember the run-up to last year's elections, we were told that by almost all media houses that they would have people there and they would have their own independent tally. Well, it's over here now, you know. Nobody has bothered. In fact, remember, what's his name? Masharia Gaido.
Your good friend Masharia Gaido,
yes. Here on Press Pass, and he said, we will release our results. So it's a year later, where are they?
Okay.
They went into the handshake.
Exactly. So here's my thing, is we can't just allow them to get away with this all the time.
Okay.
You know, whether it's El Ade, whether it is Kulbio, you know, all of these things, we just keep finding stories come up, they give us the official denials, you know, this is the official statement, the official truths. But after that, it's very quickly, let's move on.
After that, it's only time will tell.
Right, yeah, you know, exactly. You know, we can't spend so much money telling you the truth.
You know, as a journalist, you must also accept the limits of your work and your capacity to unravel the truth. Otherwise, you'll be obsessed about certain things and you'll never succeed. The truth is, sometimes the truth is never known. So Gadara may think the Westgate truth has never been known, but some people it was known. So the extent of the truth is a matter of objective.
Yeah, we go post-truth.
Exactly.
All right, let's take a break on this point because we really get to the issue of referendum and if we have made sense of it. First, we'll start with the reactions and sample opinions from around the country. Stay with Press Pass. role that the media can play in influencing the referendum outcome, if indeed there will be a referendum.
Wakati pia media inaleta mambo ya referendum, either voting yes or no, ni mzuri pia wakuje kwa undani na kueleza hizi mambo ambazo tunataka kubadilisha katika referendum. Ni vizuri vijulikane ni vipengele gani ambavyo vinatakana vibadilishwe.
Media should tell us exactly what type of referendum do Raila want and the type of referendum Ruto want.
Ni kazi yenu wanahabari, mnatupatia information kutoka kwa hao viongozi. So tungeona ni vyema viongozi wote waweze kujiunga, alafu ripoti yenye mnatupatia itatusaidia ili tuweze kuelewa hii mambo vizuri. Kwa sababu tukipata information tofauti tutachanganyika na labda tutapitisha katiba mbaya tena kama wakati ule.
Mimi kwangu ningeomba kwamba media waendelee kuelimisha Wakenya ili wajue ni nini kinachoendelea kuhusiana na referendum. Maana kama mimi mwenyewe kibinafsi ninakumbuka hii tulipokuwa tunapiga referendum iliyopita, walituambia kwamba hatuwezi rudia tena. Ingawa kulikuwa na upinzani turudie, tupinge alafu turekebishe, lakini kwa sasa tena imerudi kwa karibu. Kwa hivyo mimi sijaelewa kabisa kuhusu referendum.
Watu wa media nayo wakienda wasisafishe maneno mingi mpaka ripoti ya wananchi ipotee. Unaona? Sasa jenye inasemekana hapa chini ibebwe mpaka juu. Wale wako juu wapate kujua jini wamesema hivi na hivi.
Samani tu media wangeweza kufika mashinani, lakini kwa wakati huu wanatufikia kwa njia iliyo sawa, na tunaweza toa maoni yetu ili ifikie viongozi walioko huko juu. Sisi hatuna uwezo wa kufika huko juu, lakini media wakikuja inatufikia.
Kama NTV inatusaidia kulete maono ya katiba karibu na watu. Maneno ya ile katiba ya zamani ilikuwa mzuri kwa sababu ilikuwa inatulete karibu na kasi. Maneno ya katiba ya mpya haikutusaidia kwa sababu ilitutenga kwa kasi.
Waandishi wa habari ya media wanachangia sana kuhusu mambo ya referendum. Ni kama wenyewe wanataka iwe na inachochea wananchi pia. Kwao wakiona sana ikitangazwa, wanaona ni kama kwamba ni kitu ambacho kinastahili kuwa.
Media inataja mambo ya referendum, lakini kusema hivyo inaharibu kwa sababu watu wengi hawapendi. Wanapenda sana mambo ya referendum ifanywe, lakini ifanywe na njia mzuri.
Hii media haichangi sababu ni kitu inaonekana inaletwa na hawa wakubwa. Na hawa wakubwa pia wanatafuta tu njia yao ya kupata pesa zao. Na vile wanataka kupata pesa zao, ukiangalia ule mtu anafinyika ni ule mtu wako chini. Sababu tayari anaendelea tu kukatwa tax. Kitu yote inakuwa iko juu.
Some really good comments there from around the country, some different counties that we sampled. And you were taking the notes as you were listening. And I'll start with you, Makali, on the issue there of it seems to the people, it's as if the media itself, or at least those who are behind the stories that are put out there, actually want this referendum to take place. It doesn't seem like it is an objective conversation. What's your take on this and on what you've heard?
I think sometimes you get the impression that the public has different expectations or understanding of the work of the media. The media can initiate certain debates or certain issues, bring them to public, but it is not usually the business of the media to push a society in a given direction without having tested those ideas or publish them to get the appreciation or people's perspectives, which then the media would reflect.
Where's the place for setting the agenda if we're not?
Yes, there is the. As I'm saying, you can what I would call spot and report. Look at the documents, look at the society, the way it's progressing, look at the issues which are emerging,
yes,
which have no consensus, but which have the potential to become big issues in society or which need to be fixed. So as the media, you provide leadership in that case. You smoke out these issues, yes, and put them to public. But beyond that, once you begin pushing an agenda, you're accused of crusading. So we will put the ideas out there, the public will pick them up, and from then our job is to reflect the different perspectives or opinions around those issues. Mm-hmm. And I think with regard to the debate on the referendum, first of all, let me say the media did not begin the issue of the referendum. So any on the
it was
public
not our
domain,
creation.
it wasn't our initiative. We only captured perspectives or ideas or statements by people in the political arena, the political players. Obviously, beginning with Raila, who has been the champion of these things when he began talking about it this year. But the matter of referendum, or rather reforming or reviewing the constitution, has been on the cards for the last almost 5 years. Because I remember in 2013, an audit of the constitution and the cost of this constitution was undertaken by the Auditor General. A task force was set up to carry out that particular job.
Yes.
And they came up with lots of recommendations about this constitution and how expensive it was for us to run the country. So, but the issues were set aside because it didn't look appropriate and people were saying it's too early and so on. But then over the years, I mean, as time has moved on, people began to see and feel those challenges.
Okay, but the timing might be questionable, but I'll get reactions from the panel on that issue of whether it's an initiative by politicians and it's actually something that's been in the works for a while. Christine, you mentioned something about, someone quoting, it's raining outside or it's sunny outside, it's meant to be your duty to go and verify. Has it been a he say, she say?
Absolutely. And the thing is that I think we as the media, we've fallen into the trap of what Makali is calling spotting and report. We're just like capturing what people are saying on podiums, right? And if they say that there's a clamor for a referendum, then we say there's a clamor for a referendum, or if they say it's inevitable, then we say it's inevitable, right? Without distinguishing that their words and their sentiments, right, have a political intention, right?
Yes.
And when they say that there's a clamor for a referendum, it's like them saying it's sunny, right? And it's for us to go and what the Wananchi have said in those clips is they have expressed confusion, doubt. I don't see a clamor for anything there. In fact, there's a clamor for clarification, there's a clamor for verification, and yet our headlines are not reflecting those sentiments.
Yes.
They're not reflecting the apprehension, they're not reflecting the doubt, but instead they're just capturing what the political players are saying. And for me, I think that's a real disservice, because it just goes back to the idea that because someone is prominent, then what they're saying is newsworthy, right?
Yes.
Without realizing that
they are newsmakers.
It is that they're newsmakers, but also it gets you into a spiral, right? Because if someone says that there's a clamor for a referendum, then you say that there's a clamor, then they use your newspaper as evidence to show that there's a clamor, and then it kind of builds on itself, and that's how the public and the media and the politicians and the newsmakers kind of interact with this news beast.
Not just as defense, but perhaps a reportage of clamor for or this is inevitable is because the story is at this point developing. So there will be a time to clarify the issues that
we can't clarify when they're saying it's inevitable. We don't even know what the questions are for.
When we put a headline, it's inevitable, we say Raila says.
No, Mark. To be quite honest, I think this idea that clarification comes later for me is quite problematic. What are you reporting? And I think one of the core roles of the press is to bring clarity. It's not simply to reflect the confusion, which is what they keep doing, And I think that, personally, I think the media goes for what is dramatic, rather than doing the work of actually taking it apart. So Raila says he wants a referendum about what? Is this the discussion we are having? When those guys over there are saying that they don't know, what is the measure of an effective media if it is not an informed populace? And to the extent that your populace is confused, your audience is confused about what's going on, then you have failed. You have not brought clarity.
Yes.
And I think that we need to have certain basics, So let's identify what the issue is, If it's about amending the Constitution, referendum is not a synonym for amending the Constitution.
There are other routes.
Actually, amending the Constitution does not necessarily require a referendum. It depends on what you want to amend and the route you're going to take to amend it, you know. But it doesn't necessarily require one, you know. So let's distinguish. When they say referendum, this is actually at the end stage of the process, you know. So let's start at the beginning. Let's say, all right, what is it that you want to change?
Okay.
You know, and there's very many people who are talking, all right, we want to change to reduce cost. Others are saying we want to make it more effective. You know, which is which? Let's distinguish these issues. I like that you speak about the audit that was done, you know, but I would actually ask our media to go even beyond that, to think about what happened to the Independence Constitution. And that the very same debates we are having now about cost were the debates they had in the 60s. And those are the same debates that were used to kill Majimboism, you know, that then reconcentrated power, you know, in the presidency and put us back where we are now. So we cannot be having these debates without the media providing a context for it so that we understand.
Makali, obviously, I don't understand whether Gadara is saying that there is no clamor for constitutional amendment out there, as she also seemed to say. Yes. But, you know, the clamor can not only be reflected in the media, our media or newspapers and TV. I mean, right now, if you go online, you check Twitter, you know, check social media, it's a buzz with this discussion about whether we should, you know, review our constitution, amend it or not.
Most of them citing what politicians are saying as we reported it.
Sorry?
Most of them citing what politicians said as we reported
it. Yeah, but you know, these politicians are people who are significant in society. They have followers. There are people who listen to them. They are also charged with the responsibility of pioneering ideas, looking at society and what needs to be done next. It's their job. So if a leader identifies a particular problem and thinks this is how it should be fixed, it is even incumbent upon that leader to actually tell the people who he supports, or the electorate or the citizenry, that this matter needs to be fixed in this manner.
Very well. That's their role as political leaders. Yes. But then where do we come in as the informants, where we break down
So our job as media is then to interrogate those proposals and ideas. See the merit, see the, you know,
they're nodding their heads as if it hasn't happened.
You cannot decide for them that there is no clamor.
Okay.
Because then you'll be blocking the clamor in the first place by preempting.
It's not blocking. So we don't even have, like what the Wananchi was saying, we don't have clarity on what this is for, what it's about, what it's supposed to achieve, and yet the reporting is that it's inevitable. Prepare yourselves. Then now today, in today's news bulletin, we were talking about the cost of the referendum. Like we even gone to the money question, you know, and we're like, but what are we doing? You know, we don't even have clarity on what we are doing, and we're already discussing how much it will cost. I mean, talk about putting the cart before the horse.
But talking about clarity, we have laid out what these different sides in the debate would want.
Yes.
You know, so this is not our creation. So we wouldn't tell you this is good for you or this is bad for you. This is what this team is saying they want. This is what this team is saying they want. And they're pushing for.
Well, first I would dispute that we've actually laid out what they want. Your audience did not seem to know, you know, what they want. So I would ask about that. The second thing is, I think we get caught up in the language that is presented by politicians, that in essence we reflect what they are saying, not question it. I mean, I like that Makali is saying we should interrogate it, but the fact is that interrogation is not happening. Okay. You know? And so people will stand up and you hear Ruto has been pushed to agree to the referendum. What referendum is he agreeing to?
But hasn't he?
You know, and this is my thing. Is he being told to agree to the fact that we need to amend the constitution? You know, and what are the things that we need to amend? Why aren't we talking about those? Our media reports, and this is the headlines that we see, that, oh, Ruto told he has to agree to the referendum. Okay. This is not clarity.
I don't understand, Mark. Yes. I think, you know, Gadara, I think, is super cynic about every little thing. Because how much should, you know, how many people in the public domain should know about something for you to be convinced they know? There are different strata of people in society. There are people who will even go and pass this constitution and they will never know what it's about. As they said in the last one, Washa Soma, hakuna haja usome because there is a way in which society cannot be at the same level of appreciation or understanding of issues. There is the elite that must take up issues because they have the capacity to interrogate those issues.
Okay.
Then that information will trickle down to your mother, your grandmother, people who may have, for whom some of these issues are very complicated because they cannot really comprehend them. So you have to digest them for them, and that may come at the tail end of this process because right now is an elite combat about whether to have or not, because how many people know what's in the constitution in this country?
But how many?
So first, the conversation will be around the elite who think they know and who legitimately believe, and I think they should know what ails society more than others. So the conversation will keep expanding in circles until it
that statement on being a conversation for the elite then would inform perhaps our approach that it hasn't been inclusive of the Mwananchi on the ground. It's going to affect the masses more. So it can't, should we let it be an elitist kind of conversation now?
The Constitution begins with talking about the people of Kenya. I mean, all this, I mean, we are in a political context of, as Makali says, of elite pacts, right? Of political shuffling and reshuffling, right? But I really believe that we should have the courage and to kind of push the conversation further than that, right? Okay. That, yes, there's a way that we as the media can reflect the society and the discourses the way they are. That's okay. But as meaning makers, like we began this conversation saying, we need to move a step higher than that. And I'm just going to use Makali's arguments to actually illustrate what I'm saying, that we, the meaning makers, journalists and writers and people who are kind of trying to bring clarity into the public space, we can't have the same level of understanding as the people who don't. You get, like, we can't be just merely reflecting what the political elite and their interests are. Okay. We need to be able to push the conversation forward and include the people very explicitly into our discourses, right? Yes. Because otherwise, when does Kenya become a place for people, right? When does Kenya become for Kenyans and move beyond being just a space where elites kind of, you know, carve up the table for themselves? And for me, I've heard someone saying that at least Kenya has elite pacts and elite sharing. Yes. And if we didn't have that, then we would have something like what is in South Sudan, where it's just anarchy, right? But for me, I think that's just a false binary, that we don't have to choose between exclusion of the people and outright war, that there's a way that we can, even what the Constitution envisions, right? A place for Kenyans, a place for people, where we honor people's contribution and their dignity and their voice. And the fact that they're not educated and they're not elite doesn't mean that they're not Kenyans. Yes. Right? That they don't have a voice, they don't have a stake in this.
And I would say it doesn't mean that they can't understand things. It is how we articulate them. What is the point? What is the job of the press? What's the job of the media? You know, why is it that these guys went out onto the streets, you know, shed blood and created a constitution that protects specifically that industry, says you guys go out and do stuff. The reason is you should be explaining to them things. The lifeblood of a democracy is information, and this information cannot simply be what the politicians tell us. You know, it has to be what comes through our media and how media makes sense of what the politicians are saying. Okay. So that we understand, are they talking on our behalf? Are they talking on their behalf? And one of the central failures of our media is they have not actually done that. And we have ended up with a society that fights the battles of politicians, you know, and not its own battles.
Okay. Let me take a break at this point. I see Makali wanted to make a quick response. Jacob Abere Matlala says, on referendum debate, media need to disseminate issues about it, keep citizens aware of it, and also give a platform for airing views, and never let it go to elites alone for fear of diluting it. On that point, I'll take a break. We'll continue this conversation on the referendum, as well as a framing of the case around the murder of Monica Kimani after we get back. conversation on our role as media to shape the thoughts around the referendum discussion that is going on. Sidong says the Kenyan media is what CNN is to the USA Today society, advancing the agenda of a few individuals and interest groups and packaging it as the truth and the need for the wananchi. And I think, Fakali, you need to respond to that because you brought up the elite aspect of this conversation. And one other comment here, and Donna Africa, you say, I can't quite expand this, the duplication system of government, reducing the many branches to one branch, e.g. we have Kenya and Urban Roads Boards should be one. We should have the referendum so that we reduce the expensive system of governance we have. That's just a thought on what you feel should be the focus. Kibi Eliud, you say regurgitating what was said at political podium is no longer news. We already heard it on Twitter, Facebook and WhatsApp. Putting it in context is what media should focus on. Actually, the future is investigative journalism. So on this point, perhaps we've heard what some of those proponents or opponents of this referendum talk have put forward. In one line for each representative in terms of this discussion, what do you feel is the push for referendum? Like, let's say from ODM perspective, from Third Way Alliance, and now from the Ruto side.
First of all, before I get to that, you allow me, Mark, just to say this. I think we are being too premature in judging whether the media has performed its role with regard to this referendum question.
Okay.
The debate has only been on for about a month. And
but
it
you spoke
comes
about,
and goes.
You spoke about the need for a push for changing constitution over the last 5 years.
Yes,
going on.
And it went off. I mean, because people didn't seem interested. They were
but now it's come back because the politicians think it should.
It's come back, and it's just starting. I mean, we can't run ahead to begin smoking out the issues and whatnot. Those issues should actually come from the people in the first place. They should feel, we should feel that the need for this changes streams from them in the first place. If the media goes out on a hunting, fishing mission, or we think this is wrong, we won't be serving anything except our agenda. So as it is now, I think we are identifying different groups or personalities coming with why they think the referendum is important or reform of the constitution is important.
Okay.
And so we should begin identifying those issues and putting them in. I think Raila has talked about, parliamentary system of government and three-tier structure of government.
Yes.
That is a matter that will definitely require a referendum.
Yep.
Because there are those which cannot go to a referendum; they can be changed by parliamentary initiative, and those that have to go to the whatever.
Yes.
Then there are those like Ekuru or Court who are saying, look, we need to reduce the layers and size of our representation.
Yes.
From women rep to senators to governor, all MCAs, shrink this and have a leaner representation structure. That is serious to consider. I mean, one can't, even if you want to cut the cost of governance, those are some of the things to go for. Then there are those who think there is duplication of roles, for example, within the devolved structure. I mean, there are devolved functions, for example, that have failed to take off or are not being handled properly by county governments. Look at health services, agriculture, who is doing what? There's a lot of confusion. These things must be struck out properly in a more clinical manner in the next constitutional dispensation. So if you look at it clinically, there are issues that are serious that require to be addressed through amendment to the constitution.
Okay.
And this push, we may say, is being pushed by politicians because they have interests, and so people are trying to pin it on somebody. When Raila says something, they say because he wants to create the position of prime minister. When Ruto opposes it, they say because they think that if they create a prime minister position, they'll whittle down his powers as president because he's aiming to be president. So personal interests come in. But if we remove all these personal things, there are real issues that actually require national attention.
All right. Christine, as you're following what you're saying.
Yeah, I was just listening to what Makali is saying, and just two of these positions, first of all, are contradictory. Because we have one that wants to introduce a third layer of government, right? A third tier of government, and they're saying they want a referendum for that. And another group that's saying we want a referendum to cut costs. So how do you introduce a new layer of government and you get me? So that there needs to be clarification around. There needs to be clarification around that, and also I think we need to kind of start at the beginning of this and not to assume that the proposals that are being made to cut costs will actually make a difference in what is our problem with our budget, with borrowing and all that, right? That's actually the budget black hole, right? The executive, you know, borrowing and all that. And devolution, really, the money that it gobbles up is visible, right? It's visible because you can see the MCAs in their VXs and all that, right? So because we can see it, right, then we say it's expensive. But when you look at the numbers, what devolution brought to the table, right? It increased our spending by a much smaller amount than people think, right? Only that the spending is now visible because of the MCAs and their VXs and their big houses, right? So that's what I'm saying. You look at what is actually the budget what is the sink that takes our money and that has brought all these taxes and all that.
Okay.
Is it devolution? It's not, right?
Okay, and Patrick, there's something that David keeps saying, you know, talking about there's a personal interest angle to this. Is it then our role to call them out and really see whether this is for they're being hypocritical, the political leaders, and in the timing that they're calling for this referendum, it's for selfish ambitions, if indeed it is?
Well, yes, I think that's part of the role. I think I completely disagree with this idea that it's too early for the media to be explaining things.
Like we should wait to the last...
Yeah, that, you know, wait for people to speak, we will report what they speak, and then we'll explain to you what they actually mean. You know, I think that's a nonsensical argument. In my view, the interrogation that Makali spoke before earlier is an ongoing thing, you know, and that what we should be asked is the media performing its role, not whether it has performed it. It never stops. It should never stop performing.
It's an ongoing thing.
It's an ongoing thing. So if a politician stands up on a podium and says something, you know, your work to check it starts there. It's not, let me report what he said and then I'll tell you tomorrow whether it makes sense. You know, I'll tell you today, as I'm reporting it, whether it makes sense. It is my job to find out. That's why we verify things.
Okay.
You know, and that's not really happening. And I think one of the other things where we need to allow to enable our audiences, I think as Christine is pointing out, to be able to distinguish issues. What are we dealing? What are the real problems? You know, so if we want to fix the Constitution and we say it's because of, you know, we are spending too much money, where are we spending it? As she said, lots of it is not because of devolution itself, per se. You know, and I would say that some of the failures we should be pointing out are the safeguards that we put in the Constitution to stop government overspending as it has done.
Okay.
So why isn't Parliament holding the executive to account? There's a failure there. You know, why aren't our independent institutions, you know, stopping the sorts of excessive borrowing that we are seeing?
Okay.
You know, so that the structure we have perhaps was not designed to be able to constrain a party that's got a supermajority in Parliament. You know, and then if we want to change things, then let's think. Is there a way we can formulate a new or a slightly different arrangement such that we don't end up with these sorts of in these sorts of situations?
Okay.
You know, so that I think for me would allow us to start actually interrogating issues. You know,
all right.
As it is now, we are allowing people to simply run along, to be driven along by politicians and by their talk.
Okay.
So in fact, one thing I would say finally is, let's stop talking about referendum. You know, remove that word. Referendum comes at the end. You know, let's talk about what do we want to amend, what do we want to change, and why, and let's carry out that debate.
We're starting with the end in mind.
Yeah, we said at the end. You know.
Saying it's inevitable.
You know.
Okay. Okay.
Inevitable.
I'll give you an opportunity to, because we need to cover, you know, the depiction of certain subjects of this big story that's been over the last few weeks, dominating our headlines. On Thursday last week, NTV Seto Lale spoke to the father and brother of the late Monica Kimani. This is after it occurred that DNA results from samples picked from the late Monica Kimani's apartment last month link prime murder suspect Joseph Irungu, aka Jowie, to the scene of the murder. The thrust of this conversation with Monica's father and brother is that they denied claims that their daughter amassed a lot of wealth from prominent persons in South Sudan. This is a snippet.
They could give her about those tenders, small tenders, through the company, Medipol. So she could do better. She could come. We could supply this PVC for the ceilings and the tiles, and also the tiles and the carpet.
Well, on the other side of the contrast, tomorrow, Joseph Irungu, the main suspect in the Monica Kimani murder, is expected to take plea on the murder and attempted suicide charges at the Milimani Law Court. We'll be covering that. Last night, NTV aired an interview where investigative editor Dennis Okari spoke to the parents of murder suspect Joseph Irungu. Here's a part of that interview.
Kwa hivyo hakukuwa na tatusi yoyote ya kama ya OBO whatever, kwa sababu amekuwa admitted kijabi na akapewa madawa, na hata if anybody kama mtu yoyote angeweza kwenda kudhibitisha mambo siku hizi ni ya kompyuta. Hakuna pahali utasajifisha. Ukilipa kitu inaonyesha na ulilipa. Kwa hivyo wale wanasema hakuweza kuwa hakutibiwa kijabi, hao wanasema uongo mtupu. Wakitaka kudhibitisha waende kijabi, wataelezwa mambo vile ilikuwa. Kwa hivyo aliadmitiwa na akatibiwa. Mimi ninasoma maneno ya DNA kwa gazeti na lisha yeye hajashukuriwa DNA. Kwa hivyo hata mimi inanishangaza. DNA inatoka wapi na yeye yake haijashukuriwa? Sasa nilipata mshangao mkubwa kwa gazeti.
So there was in a few words, in terms of the depiction of the two, there was the defense from the family of Monica Kimani, the late, that she was not profiteering from people in South Sudan, and you know, she was not what people now call a slave queen. And now on this other side, there was the picture being drawn of this young boy, a church boy, who the family is honestly shocked at what they're hearing in terms of the allegations against him. So just the depiction of these two subjects, I'd want to get initial reactions from our panel. From Christine, you're still writing your notes, but I know you've been following this. What do you have to say?
Yeah, Mark. So your question about how we've portrayed Monica via conversations with her family? Yes. And Jowie as well, via conversations with his family, right? I just have two things to say about this. The reporters went to talk to Monica's family, and they came back with the story that she was not, like what you're saying, she was not being sponsored, she was not a slave queen, right? Implicitly, what we are saying there is that she was a good girl, yeah? Okay. That's what the family is trying to say, right? And I really have a problem with that kind of framing, because what if she had a sponsor? Let's put it that way, right? Okay. Does that mean that her murder was justified? You get, why do we go out looking for this information, right? So that, because that's implicitly the question we're asking in our minds, right? We're trying to portray her as someone who didn't deserve for this to happen to her. But what if she still didn't deserve to be murdered? Okay. You get? So that line of conversation actually is not benefiting anyone. It's not benefiting the public, it's not moving the conversation forward. It just kind of underscores this kind of misogynistic views that, that if women don't behave in a certain way, then something is going to happen to them, instead of questioning, why was she killed in the first place? You get me? Yes. Doesn't matter whether, you get, it matters in terms of maybe the intrigue, the storytelling, right? But if we're asking questions to exonerate her because she was a good girl, then implicitly what we are saying is that there's a group of women who deserve this kind of things to happen to them, right. And that's wrong. Okay. Secondly, with Jowie, we're doing the same thing. Asking he's being portrayed as this Christian boy, and in fact he's a good person and all these things, right? And for me, it's very problematic the way we would go out to try and exonerate him You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Kind of in the court of public opinion, by kind of framing it.
Some
in
people
this
have said we've sanitized.
Exactly. I didn't want to use, you know, but you get what I'm saying. Like, and when we are following a kind of, let me call it sensational story in this way, our ethical responsibility is so much higher, right? That it's not like not all angles of the story are worthy of pursuit. That's my angle.
Let me bring in David Makali. As an editor, would you still send a reporter to pursue these stories? And what was your understanding or reaction to these two contrasting views?
I think there is a crisis that we in the media, or a dilemma, let me put it that way, listening to her speaking.
Okay.
You're damned, whatever you do, there will be somebody who will have a different view to what you've done. There will always be the undone thing, and there will be something you did wrong. Because I imagine, and that's our business in the media now, to bring more clarity and understanding around this incident. Everybody is curious to find out, so who was this lady? How could somebody kill her in this manner? If you are to answer those questions, there's no end to any inquiry you'll make. Anything should pass, because your opinion, your objective is to establish the motive that would have led, or the circumstances under which this death would have occurred.
And you feel this pushes the story forward?
Yes, and you must, because then we would report nothing after we said she was found dead in her apartment.
Yes.
Then we would forget and move on to the next thing. Then Gadara would come the next day and say, you never gave us answers to that story.
Right.
You never told us how it happened.
My point is, you're not giving us answers.
But that is the pursuit of those answers.
Yes.
Because where is the answer? The answer is like in the stack. You're trying to look for it. You might find a clue of what could have been the reason or the cause of this death. So whichever way you go, I mean, the family of, you know, for example, Joey, will want to present their son as somebody who could not have done this.
As a saint.
And it's their right to do so. And we cannot, as media, block that view out, because then we'll be prejudiced. So we have to give them their opinion.
And let them
Similarly, those who think, oh, this guy was like this, was a crook, I mean, they have their say. It's not our business to determine who among those is right, although we exercise judgment in terms of what we think is legitimate or valid information to put out there, because some could just be spins.
Okay. Gadara, you're pinching yourself for something. Maybe you're in pain. But what do you have to say about the contrasting views that we've been putting out there?
Well, here's the thing. Is now clearly there is a PR war being fought in the press for the image of who these people are, and to that extent I completely agree with you. But
again, I disagree with him.
I'll
come back to that.
Okay. Yeah, I think people are spinning stories. People want their loved ones to be seen in the best light, you know, etc. And I don't blame them for that, you know. What I blame our press for is they should simply not be an arena for this sort of combat. What they really should be doing is giving us what he just said, clarity and understanding. Is it actually true that this guy was church-going, member of the church choir, etc.? Not just his mom says or his dad says.
Yes.
Is it actually true?
And
have we spoken to other people? Have we found out? You know, and it's the same thing even with on Monica's side. And this is not about saying that if she was one way she deserved death or whatever. No, but it's bringing clarity, it's helping people understand. So, like for example, yesterday on the John Alanamu's piece yesterday on South Sudan, he does mention Monica Kimani, and he does say that she was managing money, you know, for guys in South Sudan, you know. That's there.
Which has been denied by
ATC. So that's what I'm saying. So the point would be for me is to find clarity. Is it actually true? You know, do we have anything to back up the case one way or the other?
Yes.
You know, so that we're not just a place of he said, she said, you know, which unfortunately our media are completely excels in. You know, and I think that we should also go a bit further. I mean, there has been, I'll give you an example. There was a headline, I think it was 2 days ago,
yes,
when the whole issue of Danny's DNA came up. And it was in the Nation that they say the DNA pronounced him guilty. But DNA cannot pronounce anybody guilty. It can just say he was there. Or
but that's what it said. They didn't say it was guilty.
But they wrote that, yeah, he was guilty. And I thought, well, come on. This is not, does not seem to be how you should be reporting this. The DNA does not pronounce you guilty. All we can say is it was found there, you know, and that leads us to say you were there. Whether you killed her or not, that's another question, you know. And my thing is, we've got to start distinguishing these issues, because if we play to the gallery, if we are operating at this same level where we are sort of caught up with the emotion of things because you have to sell newspapers and things, then we do our readers a huge, huge disservice.
Okay.
Finally, I said one other thing. I think we need to also simply go beyond the kind of like the official things, and I would link this to the discussion we had before about the Constitution and stuff, and to be asking whether the safeguards in the constitutions are also being exercised in this place. So you've got a guy's DNA being tested, you know, is there consent for this happening, you know? And if it's not, then, you know, does that raise issues? Because we protect privacy within our constitution. We protect the right to bail within our constitution. You know, lots of guys right now who are being accused of things are being denied.
Even Obado, so you're talking
about yeah, exactly. And my question is simple: is we've got very, very many Kenyans languishing, you know, in prison, not because they have been convicted of any crime, simply because the state says they are a suspect. You know? And they take people to court and they say, wakae uko ndani as we do investigations. My question would be, well, shouldn't you have first done the investigation and then you charge people, you know? And I think that there is a way that the government is playing fast and loose with the protections that we have in the Constitution, and we are allowing it to. And I think as media, we're not really putting them to the sword on it. And because we allow them to, it keeps happening over and over again. There were bail and bond guidelines that were put out by Mutunga when he was CJ in 2015. You know, I would love it if the media went and checked.
But imagine how it would play out when we bring it up in a case such as this, very emotive.
But this is the thing.
And then,
you
know,
guys,
if we look like we're defending,
you guys are so worried about what you look like, you know, rather than whether you are actually doing your jobs.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. You're so worried about selling newspapers, you know, rather than actually doing the journalism that will get people to have faith in the papers and buy them because of the content in them.
Christine, your reactions as you continue following this conversation. Another headline that we had here, Maribe's dad, my daughter is guilty of love, not murder. How we should engage with the family. First of all, even in the details that we put out of the investigations as they continue, are placed to respect the families and also give them space. But they want to talk to us. Is it PR, as Gadara thinks?
So families are, like Gadara says, they're going to defend their sons and their daughters.
Yes.
We know that, right? And so whatever they say in favor of their kids is not surprising and should not be a surprise to us, right? And also should be taken with that understanding that these people are defending their loved ones. Yeah? And so if we report, if we give them the space to express themselves, I think there's room for that in a way. But if we kind of take what they're saying as kind of he said, she said, then he said, then Monica's dad, then Jackie's dad, like that, yeah? Then we're kind of being character witnesses, right, in a way, which is what the families want, right? Okay. And this is a case that is going to court. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's actually a court process that's going to go on here. So we have such a kind of a thin line that we're working on, and I think in some ways, at the beginning of this, when this was unfolding, I think there was so much confusion. The stories were not, everything was everywhere, right? But I haven't really seen that kind of distinction between what I'm saying, that the understanding that what the family says, they're defending their child, their loved one, right? And they have a right to do that. But that's not the truth. You understand me?
Yeah.
The truth exists in a...
presented as a truth.
Exactly. It exists in a different space.
But even in this...
So let me give you an example, right? Yeah. That sometimes, like for example, if Joey is being portrayed as a Christian who sang in the choir, does that mean that if he did that in his childhood, he does not grow up to become...
Right.
A con man, whatever, right? Are we saying that that inoculates a person? You get what I'm saying? Like those kind of frames that someone can say that they used to sing in the choir, and so that means that they couldn't have killed someone. Like that's a leap, that's a leap, you know. So why are we using such kind of, I would say, flimsy character evidence, and then we're using our platforms as media people to be character witnesses with such weak data? You know what I'm saying?
Okay. Would you still go with the same headlines that we've been going with, or similar headlines?
I would use the same headlines because, you see, a story is not told in a day. And all these accounts I'm hearing are about anecdotal stories told. That interview that Dennis had with the father of the parents was just one in a series of stories that have been carried.
Yes.
Why are these people not able to, in the continuum of these stories, construct a reality of the full picture of the character of Joey, or whether it's Jackie Maribe or Monica, or whoever is in the picture of these things? Must we write all the stories, all the facts and everything in one story for you to comprehend? So my question is, what is it that has not been written about, perhaps, that the media should be pointed
could I suggest
to follow?
David,
so you're talking about this being
because
the bigger picture that we're drawing.
I mean, we are presuming that the public must be fed on a spoon and everything, because if we tell them, if the parent of a suspect talks about their child, we understand it from that point of view. This is the parent, a loved one.
So people know we're not presenting it as the truth.
It's like the public cannot determine or tell that this is the father to this guy.
So you don't have to do your work.
So what we are doing is presenting the father to bring the human dimension to this person, because they grew up in an environment, in a certain setting. What is it in us trying to understand the circumstances that this person has found themselves in? What is it that we need to know? And that opinion, that view, that perspective is valid like any other.
Yes.
Just like you would go and dig up in primary school.
It as you would interrogate any other.
Or
you should interrogate as you would interrogate
so for example, if the dad says this guy used to go to church, he was he's singing in the choir, I mean, must you dispute that?
Yes.
I mean, but must you include it? You know, journalists is not to argue against evidence or accounts.
Must you include it?
Listen, you don't argue. You go and corroborate.
You don't see it as an interesting aspect.
So let me ask
you don't argue against everything.
As a journalist, is it not your job to verify the facts that you give?
Now the father tells you.
So the father says, my son used to go to the church. That is what he's told you.
Yes,
tomorrow. Is that a verified fact?
That is okay. Tomorrow.
So not the tomorrow pastor, when I am reporting
it. Yes, and there's been stories of people who
in the choir. Well, you know, that's what I'm telling Gadara. You can't have all facts to a story.
Here's the other question, here's the other issue I have with what he just said. He assumes that for me to understand what the media is reporting about the issue, I've got to read all the newspapers. Watch all the TV shows.
No. You're not getting the point.
Wait, let me tell you, I think that's what he's suggesting. Because my point is this, if you're going to write this story, you know, even if you're just writing about, yes, we went things, this is, I'm assuming, it's an addition to the stock of knowledge you already have.
Okay. Question.
And it is incumbent on you to tell guys, this is what we know.
All right,
the problem with Patrick Gadara is that he thinks everything he reads is not true. Everything you tell him is not true. Go and corroborate. If your dad tells you this guy in class 5 went to Githunguri Primary School, he says you shouldn't believe the father, go to Githunguri. There are facts you go to counter check, but there are things which are just matter of course that they are not subject to further inquiry because they would be not necessary. There are those which are necessary to interrogate.
Okay, ladies
that is inquiry.
I have to bring it to a wrap now. And in just a few seconds, each of you, in terms of moving the story forward, what you feel should be given as priority. Really quick, I have to go to international radar.
Well,
Referendum
for me,
and also this story.
It's verify what you're being told.
Yes.
For me, it will be try as much as possible not to become simply a conduit for he said, she said sort of stories, but to actually put out so that guys know, your audience can be sure. Deliver what Makali said. Deliver clarity, deliver understanding.
Okay.
You know, and I don't think that so far we are seeing much of that.
I want to give you the last word. Makali, your last word on this?
Well, I think in both respects. First of all, in the murder stories, whether it's Obado, whether it is the one involving Obado, or the one involving Joey and all these other people, the stories are every day moving to the next level.
Right.
You cannot surmount a story in one day. So what we miss today is a lead to follow up the next day. And it's taken how long, for example, for people to begin to understand, does Joey have a family? It took a long time. But because maybe the people are not forthcoming, it's not for lack of inquiry. We send people out to go and look for these people to try and figure out, where did he go to school? Are there any bodies?
But people are afraid to talk and be associated.
Yeah. So inquiry, journalistic inquiry is a progressive exercise. And stories cannot be all written, all the facts or aspects of a story cannot be in one story. So if you don't have money to buy the newspaper the next day, you can't blame the writer for not telling you everything, because information comes at a time. You may not get all of it at one time. Nor does it mean you can't therefore write the story.
Right.
But on the matter of referendum,
yes.
As I said, I think it's too early to be judgmental about how far the media, what the media is doing. We're only also beginning to go at the pace of the debate itself. And we'll bring information to bear, we'll bring into public domain at the right time.
Okay.
And the time is just about now. I mean, the debate is just starting.
Okay, Christine, last word.
Two things. One is the executive spends so much more money than the offices that were created by devolution, and I think we should look into that. But finally, to tie all these things together, the same dedication and focus and desire for clarity that I'm seeing in Monica and Jowie's story, I mean that investigation, going to the parents, all that, I wish we could have that same verve and that same commitment in this referendum debate. Because it shows me that the Kenyan media is actually capable of digging into a story. So I want to see the same thing with the referendum.
Kali says it is coming.
It is coming.
And thank you. That I know you want to talk, but we can't.
Forget referendum. Don't use that word anymore.
We'll see if my editors will use it. And now into our international radar. Police in Bulgaria are investigating the killing of investigative journalist Victoria Marinova. Victoria's body was found in a park in the northern city of Rouge, and in Bulgaria, her death immediately drew international condemnation. Elsewhere in Turkey, the president has spoken on the fate of a missing Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi amid reports that the critic may have been killed after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul.
The body of 30-year-old Victoria Marinova, an investigative journalist, was found on Saturday near a pedestrian alley in an area with heavy vegetation. Preliminary investigations showed the cause of death was blows to the head and suffocation. Authorities who described the murder as exceptionally brutal say Marinova was raped before she was killed. It's not clear if Marinova's murder was related to her journalistic work. However, authorities are working to identify witnesses and potential motives for her murder. Marinova was a presenter on a recently relaunched current affairs talk program called Detector. Its first episode featured an interview with two Bulgarian investigative journalists exploring alleged fraud involving EU funds linked to businessmen and politicians. The pair were arrested in September while looking into the case. She's the third high-profile journalist to be killed in the European Union in the past year and the fourth since the start of 2017. Elsewhere in Turkey, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said he is hopeful about the fate of missing Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, amid reports that the critic may have been killed after entering the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Turkish sources say they believed Khashoggi was killed at the consulate in what they described as premeditated murder. accusations sources inside the consulate have denied. Khashoggi, a regular contributor to the Washington Post and former editor-in-chief of Al Arab News Channel, has been an outspoken critic of the Saudi regime. A small group of journalists and NGO members staged a protest outside Saudi consulate in Istanbul on Monday to denounce the disappearance of the journalist. Khashoggi's fiancée and a close friend said he vanished after entering the Saudi mission in Istanbul last week.
Such a sad story, as Gadar is saying as he's following that. Thank you to Rosalia Karanja, who is the producer and put this together for us, and to the team that made this possible. Thank you to Patrick Gadara, a very good friend of Makali, I believe, as you've been following from the conversation. And you can find his work and more of his conversations on current affairs on theelephant.info. As well as Christine Mungai. You can find her there on The Elephant, her contributions in terms of the articles she writes. But she also is very vocal and writes a lot on her Twitter handle, that is Christine_Mungai. At Chris, at CHRIS_Mungai. And you can find Mr. Mkali, David Makali, at David Makali1. And he is very open in terms of his views that he shares on current affairs. And he did tweet sometime, Kieleweke. Referendum, it will happen. Itafanyika. He did say that. So probably that informs why he had his views on the referendum as he did and as he expressed. Thank you so much. Of course, he's the head of content at Radio Africa and in charge of a lot of what goes on there in terms of the editorial content as well as the Star. So yes, I'm not just promoting that. Get the Star, get the Daily Nation, get the Standard if you want to. Tomorrow, read The Elephant, I'm told, and this is where I sign off because I haven't been paid for this advertisement. My name is Mark Masai. Good night.
It is also media. It's also media.
Yes. Yeah.